should never again stand behind the seal of the President of the United States. Never again. Never again. Never again.
3 days later.
NBC News can now project that Donald Trump has won the state of Wisconsin, which means he is the winner of this race and will return to the White House as this country's 47th president.
As you probably know by now, Donald Trump has officially been declared the 47th president. This was announced last night after he defeated Kamala Harris. As expected, MSNBC is in complete meltdown mode. In this video, we're going to dive into some of their reactions, discuss the usual lies, and break it all down. Let's start by watching Jen Psaki's reaction as she announces Trump will be the next president. Take a look.
NBC News can now project that Donald Trump has won the state of Wisconsin, which means he is the winner of this race and will return to the White House as this country's 47th president. And for so many of you watching right now, that news is, to say the least, a lot to digest. I understand that personally. After he lost 4 years ago, he refused to accept the outcome and incited a violent insurrection on our nation's capital. He's campaigned while facing criminal indictments related to his efforts to overturn the 2020 results, and he's run as a convicted felon. During this campaign, he has also promised to essentially be an authoritarian leader, to use power like no American president ever has before, and wield that power to go after his political enemies. This is a man who's also bragged about overturning Roe v. Wade and stripping away women's bodily autonomy. He's promised to conduct mass deportations to crack down on the rights of millions of Americans. Donald Trump is an anti-democratic force, but he's just been elected democratically in our country. And here's what might be the hardest part to hear, but we have to talk about and we have to say, and it is a hard part to digest for all of us. But we have to be honest about what we saw in this election. Donald Trump was elected by expanding his support over a number of key groups.
Talk about low energy. They're clearly deflated after Kamala Harris's loss. It's no surprise, though, MSNBC has been all in for her from the start. But let's be honest, they're not exactly known for being a top-tier news outlet. Compared to CNN, ABC, or CBS, they've buried themselves in propaganda and endless Trump bashing. That's why it was satisfying to see them make the official announcement. It was worth watching, don't you think? Now, let's get into the first big meltdown where they try to explain why Kamala Harris lost. And this explanation comes from someone who actually calls themselves a reverend. Let's take a look.
Rev, let's talk about, you talked about gender and race. Let's talk about race. Donald Trump fared very well with Hispanic voters, especially Hispanic men. The numbers are coming in still a little early, but I think he did better with black men than was expected in the past. What do you think pushed that, especially with the Hispanic voters going for Donald Trump as much as they did? Because that made a big difference.
I think that a lot of it was he was able to sell a lot of Hispanic voters that immigration was a threat to them, that some of the people coming across the border was a threat to them. I think that we've got to be honest, among Hispanic men and black men, there's a lot of misogyny. And I think that we've got to deal with the reality that he appealed to this whole false macho thing that some black men and some Latino men went for. I think that we cannot sit around just bedwetting. We've got to deal with the reality, and we've got to deal with the situation as it is in our own communities.
All right, let's be real here. Claiming Kamala Harris lost because of misogyny and sexism is just avoiding the actual issue. The truth is simple. She lost because of the fundamentals. It's the economy, plain and simple. When people are struggling to make ends meet, why would they vote for someone tied to the current administration? It doesn't add up. Her campaign was full of contradictions, like talking about turning the page while being part of the same leadership people are dissatisfied with. That's the real problem. and it's something they need to face. But of course, the discussion doesn't end there. Let's see where it goes next.
I just say, Rev, really quickly, too, Democrats need to be mature, and they need to be honest. And they need to say, yes, there's misogyny. But it's not just misogyny from white men. Mm-hmm. It's misogyny from Hispanic men.
Right.
It's misogyny from black men, things we've all been talking about, who do not want a woman leading them. Might be race issues with Hispanics. They don't want a black woman as president of the United States. You know, the Democratic Party, I've always found when you're sitting around talking, they love to just sort of balkanize everybody into these separate groups and say, oh, white people don't like women and black people. No, it is time for the Democrats to say, okay, and you and I have talked about this before, a lot of Hispanic voters have problems with black candidates.
Right.
A lot
and
of,
with other Hispanics. You got some that don't like each other. And some of the most misogynist things I've heard going on this Get Out the Vote tour came from black men. I mean, misogynist things. So you're absolutely right. It's not simplistic.
A lot of Hispanic voters have issues with black candidates. Really? Where does that even come from? Maybe, just maybe, the issue is with the candidate themselves. Could it be that Kamala Harris just wasn't a strong candidate from the start? Let's be honest, expecting her to win after running a rushed 60 to 90-day campaign was probably unrealistic from the get-go. What we're seeing here is yet another example of the corporate media's decline. If this is how they react to Trump earning a clear victory, then what purpose do they really serve? And let's not even bring up podcasts or independent creators. They can't handle the competition because this is exactly how they view us.
And you have to, within that, figure out how to win. And I think there's a lot of very legitimate discussion here about how Democrats lost this. Yep. But I just got a text from a member of Congress saying, you know, something else we need to look at is how people are turning to social media, podcasts, and other non-traditional sources for their news, and also news stations that aren't news. And I canvassed in all of the battlegrounds. I was shocked by the amount of misinformation voters were truly repeating back to me. Truly shocked. I do believe this is what caused the collapse of the Democrats nationwide. You cannot win when people believe lies.
But I mean,
I think that's fair, too.
Or maybe people simply don't trust someone who they know is lying. These people think Trump won because of lies. But here's the kicker. It's not lies from the right. It's lies from people like them. Their manipulation, blatant bias, and complete lack of professionalism in reporting turned off a lot of voters. It's no secret. And let's not forget when Kamala Harris shifted her message from joy to labeling Trump as Hitler. That was the final straw for many. Again, maybe the problem isn't Trump, maybe it's them. When you lose this badly and face this level of rejection, maybe it's not your opponent at all. Maybe you just don't understand what's really going on.
Claire McCaskill, your thoughts this morning?
Well, first, I think we have to acknowledge that Donald Trump knows our country better than we do. I think he figured out that anger and, frankly, fear were way more powerful than appealing to people's better angels. That anger and fear were going to work in this election, whether you're afraid of immigrants or afraid of people who are trans. He figured that out. And I think we all thought everyone's better angels would prevail. Turns out the better angels went on vacation when Donald Trump came down the escalator, and they haven't returned. And listen, credit to Susie Wiles and Chris Savita. And I think that is something that will be talked about for a long time. Books will be written about it. His assassination attempt helped. But keep in mind where he made the most ground, where he made up the most ground, was first with Hispanic voters, knowing how he's talked about Hispanic people in this campaign. Let that sit for a moment. The second one was, in fact, in urban areas. He did much better. That was the second area he did much better. And the last one was with young voters. I think the Democratic Party was so cocksure that young people would reject this guy because they see a different America than he does. Turns out He appealed to their grievance and their anger and their fear just as much as he was appealing to white folks in rural America that aren't college educated.
Let's take a step back and think this through. The campaign wasn't centered on anger or fear, even though those emotions were likely present for many Americans. At its core, it was about basic common sense. Why would voters choose to give another term to an administration that has already struggled to deliver results? It's not about sexism, misogyny, or even Donald Trump. It's about following a historical pattern. Throughout history, when the economy falters, Americans tend to reject the incumbent party. Still, some argue the economy is doing fine, but voters saw through the lie. They knew it wasn't true, and that's exactly why they lost. But let's be real. Another factor could be the way their candidate communicates. Sadly, we can't ignore that. Let's take a closer look.
Should never again stand behind the seal of the President of the United States. Never again. Never again. Never again.
Honestly, she never truly connected with everyday Americans, those who were struggling, worried, and fearful about their financial future. It wasn't about rights being taken away. It was about real issues impacting people's lives. Yet, somehow, Joy Reid is stuck on making it all about race, completely ignoring the bigger picture. Here she is, blaming white women for Kamala Harris's loss.
But in the end, you know, if they didn't make their numbers and essentially exceed the numbers that Joe Biden had in the suburbs, and I think we have to be blunt about why. Black voters came through for Kamala Harris. White women voters did not. That is what it appears happened in that state, is that if you can't flip enough white women, and we've talked about this on this set numerous times, is that you have a state where you've got a 6-week abortion or a 12-week abortion. I think theirs might be 12 weeks.
Yep.
But it's a state where women lost their reproductive rights, where there was a very heavy push to get women to focus on not putting in place, re-electing, putting back into the White House the person who was responsible for taking those rights away and restoring them. But that message obviously was not enough to get enough white women to vote for Vice President Harris, a fellow woman. This will be the second opportunity that white women in this country have to change the way that they interact with the patriarchy. And
let me be real with you guys. Her message makes it clear. She thinks white women are clueless, just like she assumes black men are radical or easily manipulated. It's honestly amazing to watch the unraveling of this network because they show no respect for anyone who doesn't share their exact beliefs. They don't care to understand your struggles, your opinions, or why you think the way you do. A reasonable person would take the time to listen and maybe even consider, hey, could my perspective on this country be wrong? But emotional intelligence seems to be missing here. And then we have Jonathan, who has his own MSNBC show, showing us exactly that with his completely off-the-rails response.
I can't help but wonder if the American people have given up on democracy simply because of what he's told us, what he wants to do, simply because of what the Supreme Court decided in terms of immunity. I mean, he has said he wants to go after his political enemies. I am your retribution. So if indeed what Fox is reporting, if that ends up being true and ends up being the case, then this conversation about who we are as a country, I was going to say will pop off in earnest, but I think we will have an answer, especially because I'm looking over your shoulder. Right now, Donald Trump has 51.2% of total votes. 51.2.
First, let's talk about how hesitant they were to call the race. By this point, Fox News had already announced Trump as the winner, but they held back as long as they could, refusing to say it outright. That just shows how petty they've become. And then they claim the country has given up on democracy. Let's be honest, they gave up on democracy long ago. They abandoned it when they went after Trump. They abandoned it when they orchestrated a soft coup on Joe Biden, skipping a fair contest or open convention and handing the nomination straight to her, ignoring millions of votes in the process. And we can't ignore the censorship, vaccine mandates, and the hypocrisy of shouting, "My body, my choice," while denying people that same principle. The real threats to democracy have been coming from their side, plain and simple. Now, we have Joe Scarborough, one of the leading voices of Trump derangement syndrome, stepping in with his take on why she lost. It's predictable, but let's hear him out.
This morning, this is about as bleak as any time for Democrats since the so-called 1984 San Francisco Democrats. It's time for the Democrats to take a good, long, hard look at how this happened. And if they just say Trump bad, Democrats virtuous, they're going to keep losing. Because this, again, is so widespread. This is not about just Donald Trump. This is about the Democratic Party and being radically disconnected from the rest of the country. Look at the map.
That was hard to admit, but it seems like Joe Scarborough finally said something honest. They're completely out of touch. We've been saying this for months. The Democratic Party isn't what it was 10 years ago. They've shifted so far left that even some of their own voters crossed the aisle to support Trump. As we wrap things up, let's bring it all together. According to MSNBC, the main reason Kamala Harris lost boils down to what this one person had to say.
Basil, your top takeaways. What message did American voters send?
Well, a good chunk of the American voter wanted to take their country back, and we will soon see what that means. There are levels of sexism and racism that clearly a lot of people in this country are willing to tolerate, which is also something that, you know, we may have woken up in the same country in a sense, but that becomes much more clear this morning. I would also say that there were conversations for over a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks about how black men weren't doing their part. Black people did their part and did everything they needed to do, including the black woman who ran. So this isn't, and going to a point that Mike Memoli had made earlier, this isn't a Democratic problem per se, because it's not a problem that can be solved with a campaign. These are deep-rooted issues in our country that we absolutely need to address.
They just can't seem to face the truth about why Kamala Harris lost. It wasn't about sexism or racism. It was about her poor track record, lack of answers to critical questions, unlikable personality, and being part of an administration with a 54% disapproval rating. Instead of addressing these issues, they're clinging to tired excuses, which only proves how disconnected they are from reality. We'll continue covering every stage of the meltdown from MSNBC and other outlets as they try to spin this loss. Here's the reality. Donald Trump is now the 47th president of the United States. In my next video, I'll break down exactly why this happened. For now, this video focuses on the media's reaction and their unwillingness to accept the fundamentals. And that's the key point. In life, the fundamentals always matter. Whether it's in sports, relationships, careers, or self-improvement, sticking to the basics gets the job done. Kamala Harris and the Democratic Party ignored the fundamentals, while Donald Trump stayed focused on them. Voters cared about the economy, immigration, crime, safety, and foreign policy, issues that drove massive turnout in rural areas. Meanwhile, urban voters didn't show up for Kamala because her message didn't address what mattered most. That's my take. What do you think about MSNBC's meltdown and their claims that sexism and racism caused Kamala Harris to lose? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Your support helps us reach more people, and we've got plenty of great discussions and analysis coming your way. Don't miss out. Subscribe now.